Welcome to our deep dive into supersonic flight. We're going to explore the history, the engineering marvels, and even some of those not-so-happy accidents along the way.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating story, pushing those boundaries, not just in terms of speed, but also in understanding the very nature of sound and how we interact with it.
Okay, so we've got this stack of research and articles, all about going faster than the speed of sound. So what's the mission for this deep dive?
I think it's to trace the evolution of supersonic flight, from those early, almost accidental encounters with the sound barrier, to the iconic Concorde, and finally to what the future holds for quieter, maybe even commercially viable, supersonic travel.
Yeah, what's so fascinating is how much of this story is about managing the consequences of that speed. The
Hmm.
sonic booms, the fuel consumption, the sheer complexity of engineering these aircraft. It's really a constant balancing act between achieving that incredible speed
Hmm.
and dealing with the realities of physics. All right, so let's unpack that, starting with those early days. Our sources paint a picture of a time when even getting close to the speed of sound was a huge deal. It was this unknown frontier, a mysterious barrier that many thought couldn't be broken.
Right. And even the term supersonic didn't exist back then. But think about it. Even on relatively slow planes, the tips of the propellers could actually reach supersonic speeds. So that's where a lot of the early research focused. Not on entire aircraft, but on those tiny propeller tips. They were kind of dipping their toes into the supersonic realm without even realizing the full implications.
Whoa, so they were accidentally creating mini sonic booms. What did they learn from that?
Exactly. It turns out those spinning propeller tips were experiencing shock waves and drag, even at those relatively low speeds. And this was a crucial discovery because it showed that these aerodynamic challenges weren't just a problem with the speed of sound, they started much earlier. And this spurred the creation of the first high-speed wind tunnels, some even cobbled together from industrial parts because the specialized equipment didn't exist yet.
Oh, wow. I love that ingenuity. They were basically making it up as they went along. It really speaks to that spirit of innovation and exploration that defined those early days. So how did we go from studying propeller tips to actually breaking the sound barrier?
Well, the date is etched in history. October 14th, 1947, Captain Chuck Yeager, piloting the Bell X-1, nicknamed Glamorous Glennis after his wife, became the first person to officially break the sound barrier.
What a moment. I bet it was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. What was it like to be in that cockpit?
Oh, I can only imagine. You're strapped into an experimental aircraft, shaped like a .50 caliber bullet. And for good reason. Bullets were already breaking the sound barrier, so that shape was the key. You're dropped from a B-29 bomber, ignite the rocket engine, and push towards the unknown. You're fighting G-forces, the controls are stiff, and then silence. You've punched through the sound barrier.
Wow, talk about a wild ride. And our sources mentioned that Yeager did this with 2 broken ribs from a horseback riding accident. He sounds like quite a character.
Oh, he was a true maverick, tough as nails and incredibly skilled. And his supersonic adventures didn't end there. A couple of years later, he took the X-1A, an upgraded version, to Mach 2.44, over twice the speed of sound. But that flight nearly ended in disaster. He experienced something called inertial coupling.
Inertial coupling. That sounds intense, I have to admit. I'm not familiar with that term. Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, so it's a phenomenon that happens at these high speeds. Basically, the aircraft's mass distribution can interact with its rotational forces in a way that creates this uncontrollable tumbling. Picture a spinning top that starts to wobble uncontrollably. That's inertial coupling, and it can be incredibly dangerous, especially at supersonic speeds.
Yikes. So Yeager was basically wrestling a spinning top that was going twice the speed of sound. It's a good thing he was such a gifted pilot.
Absolutely, he managed to regain control, but it highlights the incredible risks involved. In this early supersonic research, these were uncharted territories, and every flight was a learning experience, often through close calls like that one.
Okay, so we've got this iconic image of Yeager breaking the sound barrier. But our sources also point to a whole team of unsung heroes who were laying the groundwork. The NACA.
Absolutely. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA, the predecessor to NASA, was instrumental in making supersonic flight a reality. They were doing the crucial research, pushing the boundaries of what was known about high-speed flight.
I'm curious, what kind of research were they doing before anyone had actually gone supersonic?
Well, they were visionaries, thinking decades ahead. One key figure was John Stack, an engineer who, as early as 1933, proposed building a research plane, specifically for exploring high-speed flight, and this was long before the X-1 even existed.
Whoa, so they were already anticipating the need for a whole new kind of aircraft, even before the technology was there.
Exactly. They were already thinking about how to break the sound barrier before anyone had actually done it. And they didn't just theorize, they were incredibly resourceful in their experiments. They used some pretty wild methods to gather data.
Like what? I'm picturing some pretty crazy contraptions.
Well, imagine this. They were dropping instrumented models from planes to study how they behaved at high speeds. And they even mounted mini-wings onto P-51 Mustangs for high-speed dives. Think of it like creating makeshift wind tunnels in the sky itself.
That's incredible. It's a testament to their dedication and also their creativity. They were finding ways to push the boundaries of knowledge with whatever tools they could get their hands on.
It was a true golden age of aeronautical research. And all of this, Yeager's daring flights, the NASA's groundbreaking research, laid the foundation for the next big leap in supersonic flight. The Concorde.
Ah, the Concorde, the epitome of speed and luxury. It was more than just an airplane. It was a cultural icon. Imagine sipping champagne while cruising at twice the speed of sound. It doesn't get much more glamorous than that.
The Concorde was truly a marvel of engineering, a symbol of a bygone era of jet-set travel, flying from London to New York. In under 3.5 hours, it was a game changer. But as with many pioneers, it had its share of challenges.
And we can't talk about the Concorde, without addressing those challenges right. The noise, the fuel consumption. It wasn't all champagne and caviar, was it?
Right. The Concorde was incredible, but it also had some major drawbacks. First, there was the noise, both during takeoff and landing, but most infamously, its incredibly loud sonic booms, and it guzzled fuel like crazy, which, along with its limited seating for about 100 passengers, made it inherently exclusive and expensive.
Okay, so the Concorde was basically the Ferrari of the skies. Fast, sleek, and out of reach for most people. But let's talk about that sonic boom. We can't ignore that elephant in the room, can we?
You're hitting on a crucial point. The sonic boom was, and still is, a major hurdle for supersonic flight. It's the reason why we can't fly supersonic over land in most parts of the world.
So let's break it down. What exactly causes a sonic boom, and why is it so incredibly loud? I'm sure some of our listeners have heard one, but many haven't.
So imagine this. As an aircraft flies faster than the speed of sound, it generates these pressure waves that bunch up in front of it, kind of like a boat creating a bow wave. And these waves merge into a cone-shaped shock wave that trails behind the aircraft. And when that shock wave hits the ground, we hear it as a sudden, incredibly loud boom, like a miniature thunderclap.
So it's not just the engine noise, it's the plane literally punching a hole through the air, creating this shock wave that follows it wherever it goes.
That's a great way to put it. And those booms aren't just startling. They can reach over 100 decibels, which is about as loud as a jackhammer going off right next to you.
Ouch. I can understand why people weren't too keen on having those booms happening regularly overhead. No surprise then that the FAA banned supersonic flight over land back in 1973.
Precisely. It was just too disruptive. And frankly, there wasn't a viable solution at the time to quiet the sonic boom down. And that, along with other factors, led to the Concorde's retirement in 2003, marking the end of commercial supersonic flight, at least for a while.
It's almost like we had this taste of what supersonic travel could be, and then it was snatched away. It seemed like a glimpse into a future where travel could be so much faster, but then reality, in the form of noise and expense, set in.
Yeah. But even as the Concorde was being retired, the dream of supersonic flight didn't die. In fact, it was quietly evolving in research labs and design studios around the world. And that leads us to what's happening now. The quest for a quieter, more sustainable, and maybe even more accessible supersonic future.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting. We've covered the past with all its triumphs and challenges. But what does the future hold? Is there any chance for a world where we can zip across the globe and supersonic speeds without shattering windows or breaking the bank?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's what we'll dive into next. Get ready, because things are about to get really quiet and really fast. So we've talked about that sonic boom problem, the one that effectively grounded the Concorde. But even as the Concorde was being retired, the dream of supersonic flight didn't die.
Right, and our sources point to NASA, who never stopped working on making supersonic flight quieter. And it seems like they might actually be on the verge of a breakthrough.
Right. That's where things get really interesting. NASA has been developing this experimental aircraft called the X-59 QueSST, which stands for Quiet Supersonic Technology. And it's designed to minimize those sonic booms, turning them into much quieter thumps.
A thump instead of a boom.
Okay.
Color me intrigued. How does that actually work? Is it magic?
Not magic, but some pretty ingenious engineering. It all comes down to the shape and design of the aircraft. The X-59 has this incredibly long and slender design, almost needle-like. It's a radical departure from the delta wing shape of the Concorde. And it's all about redirecting those pesky shock waves.
So it's not just about going fast. It's about how you slice through the air.
Exactly. Remember how we talked about those shock waves that caused the boom? Well, the X-59 shape is all about spreading those shock waves out, preventing them from merging, and creating that loud boom. The long nose, the repositioned engine on top of the aircraft, and even the lack of a forward-facing canopy. All these features are meant to sculpt the air around the plane.
It's like they're playing a high-stakes game of air hockey for the laws of physics.
Mm.
And the X-59 isn't just a design on paper. It's actually been built right.
You're right, it has been built. And NASA is planning to actually fly it over communities.
Yeah.
Collecting data on the noise and people's reactions. They want to gauge the feasibility of supersonic flight over land again.
Oh, so they're actually going to test how people experience this quieter sonic thump. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic. Even if the X-59 is wildly successful, and those thumps are barely noticeable, can we really expect supersonic travel to become something most of us can experience? Or will it always be the domain of the ultra-wealthy?
That's the big question. And it's not just about the sonic boom. There are still some major challenges when it comes to making supersonic flight more widespread.
Like what? What are the factors that might keep supersonic travel in the luxury category?
It really boils down to physics and economics. Supersonic aircraft, to be efficient, need to be long and slender to minimize drag and fly efficiently at those speeds. Think of a needle cutting through fabric. That's the ideal shape, but that limits how many passengers you can fit, which naturally drives up the ticket price.
So it's a classic supply and demand issue. Fewer seats, higher demand, higher prices, the Concorde all over again.
Right, and then there's the question of fuel efficiency. Supersonic planes, even with advancements like the X-59, still guzzle fuel compared to conventional aircraft. It takes a lot of energy to break the sound barrier and stay there.
That makes sense. In a world where we're increasingly concerned about the environmental impact of air travel, that fuel consumption is a huge factor.
Absolutely. There's a real tension between the desire for speed and the need for sustainability. Aircraft designers and engineers are looking for ways to make supersonic flight more efficient. But there are these fundamental limits imposed by the laws of physics.
So a quieter sonic boom doesn't magically solve every problem. What about airports and infrastructure? Can they even handle supersonic flights?
That's another challenge. Think about it. Supersonic planes require special runways and terminals that can handle the increased speeds and noise on takeoff and landing. And even if we crack the sonic boom problem over land, those takeoffs and landings are still going to be loud.
So even if the quieter technology works perfectly, there's still a long way to go before supersonic travel becomes mainstream. It's not just a technological challenge, it's an economic and logistical one as well.
Right, but that doesn't mean the future of supersonic flight is bleak. Our sources suggest that even if it doesn't become for everyone, supersonic travel could still have a bright future, particularly for transoceanic flights.
Interesting. Why transoceanic flights specifically?
Well, those noise restrictions over land, the ones that grounded the Concorde, they don't apply over the open ocean. So flying supersonic over water is still very much on the table.
Ah, I see. It's like opening up a whole new highway in the sky, one that bypasses those noisy land-based restrictions.
Exactly. Think about the time savings. On a flight from New York to London, or Los Angeles to Tokyo, it could be cut in half, or even more, with supersonic speeds. That's incredibly appealing for business travelers, or anyone who wants to get to their destination as quickly as possible.
And let's face it, there's a certain allure to flying faster than the speed of sound. It captures the imagination, that sense of adventure, and pushing boundaries.
Absolutely. It's about more than just saving time. It's about experiencing something truly unique. And our sources point to some companies that are actively working on bringing this vision of transoceanic supersonic travel to life.
Okay, give us the names. Who are the players in this supersonic space race?
One company making headlines is Boom Supersonic. They're developing an aircraft called Overture, which is envisioned as this sleek, 80-passenger airliner capable of flying at Mach 1.7. Not quite as fast as the Concorde, but still blazingly fast compared to anything we have today.
So they're picking up where the Concorde left off. Same speed, same luxury.
Similar in concept, but with some key differences. Boom is focusing on those long-haul, transoceanic routes, targeting city pairs like New York to London or Seattle to Tokyo, routes where flying over land isn't an issue. And they're emphasizing sustainability, aiming to power Overture with 100% sustainable aviation fuels.
Now that's exciting. Tackling the fuel efficiency issue head-on, that's a game changer.
It's still early days for Boom, and there are plenty of technical and regulatory hurdles to overcome, but their work represents a tangible effort to bring supersonic travel back in a more environmentally responsible way.
I'm really intrigued by this idea of sustainable supersonic flight. It seems like such a contradiction. But it's exactly the kind of innovation we need. It's like, yes, we want to go fast, but we also want to be mindful of our impact on the planet.
Exactly. It shows that the quest for speed doesn't have to come at the expense of the planet. And Boom isn't the only player in the game. There are other companies like Ariane Supersonic and Spike Aerospace, also developing supersonic business jets aimed at this transoceanic market.
So it sounds like the future of supersonic flight is still very much up in the air,
Yeah.
so to speak. But it's not just about billionaires sipping champagne at Mach 2. There's a real possibility that supersonic technology could become more sustainable, more accessible, and maybe even play a role in addressing some of the environmental concerns we have about air travel.
I agree. There's so many factors at play. Technological, economic, environmental, regulatory. But one thing is clear. The dream of breaking the sound barrier and making it a regular part of travel is still very much alive. But the story of supersonic flight isn't just about innovation and technological breakthroughs. It's also a story of risk, of pushing boundaries, and sometimes of tragic consequences. And our sources highlight some of the accidents and challenges that came along with this pursuit of supersonic speed.
Right, we can't gloss over those darker chapters. It's a reminder that progress often comes at a cost. And as much as we're focused on the future, it's important to understand those lessons from the past.
Exactly, and that's what we'll explore next. The accidents that shaped the evolution of supersonic flight, the risks involved, and the lessons learned.
So we've talked about the allure of supersonic flight, the speed, the glamour, the technological marvel of it all. But our sources also paint a picture of a journey fraught with risk and, unfortunately, some tragic accidents. It's a reminder that pushing the boundaries of technology often comes at a price.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Every new frontier, especially in aviation, has its share of risks. We're talking about aircraft traveling faster than the speed of sound. And even seemingly small issues can have catastrophic consequences at those speeds.
Right, so where do we start? Which accident had the biggest impact on the development of supersonic flight?
Well, one of the most well-known
Yeah.
and tragic accidents involving a supersonic aircraft was the crash of Air France Flight 4590 in 2000. It was the only fatal accident involving the Concorde, and it really sent shockwaves through the aviation world.
Yeah, I remember that. It was a huge story at the time. What happened?
So the investigation revealed that the crash was caused by a piece of debris on the runway that punctured one of the Concorde's tires during takeoff. And this debris came from a Continental Airlines DC-10 that had taken off just minutes earlier.
Wow, so a chain of events, ultimately triggered by something as seemingly insignificant as debris on the runway.
Yes, and it highlights the incredible fragility of these complex systems. That punctured tire caused a piece of the tire to break off and hit the underside of the wing, and this ruptured a fuel tank, which led to a fire. And the Concorde lost control shortly after takeoff, tragically crashing into a hotel.
It's a stark reminder that even with advanced technology, these seemingly small things can have devastating consequences. And this accident had a profound impact on the Concorde program, didn't it?
Absolutely. It led to a series of safety modifications and investigations, but it also raised these serious questions about the inherent risks of supersonic flight and the vulnerability of these aircraft to even minor damage. And so the accident, along with other factors, contributed to the Concorde's eventual retirement just a few years later.
It's almost like we had a glimpse into this incredible future of travel, and then it was snatched away, partly due to these safety concerns. But it's important to remember that this wasn't the first time supersonic flight had faced tragedy. Our sources also mentioned earlier accidents that happened during the research and development phase, before supersonic travel was even commercially available.
Right. Those early accidents were almost inevitable, given all the unknowns they were facing. Remember Chuck Yeager's near-death experience? With inertial coupling in the X-1A, he was incredibly lucky to survive that.
Yeah, that was a close call. But not all pilots were as fortunate, were they?
Unfortunately, no. Inertial coupling, that phenomenon, where the aircraft's mass distribution can interact with its rotational forces at these high speeds, causing this uncontrollable tumbling, was a major challenge for many early supersonic aircraft, and several test pilots lost their lives, pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
It's sobering to think about the risks those pilots took, knowing that they were essentially flying into the unknown. They were true pioneers, paving the way for the safer supersonic aircraft we have today, even if it meant paying the ultimate price.
Their bravery and the data they gathered, even through those accidents, was invaluable. It helped engineers and designers understand those complex aerodynamic forces and develop solutions to make supersonic flight safer.
So what are the key takeaways from all these accidents? What did we learn?
Well, one of the biggest lessons is the importance of redundancy and fail-safe mechanisms in supersonic aircraft design. Because the consequences of a failure at those speeds are so high, it's crucial to have backup systems, multiple layers of protection, and systems that can compensate for potential failures.
It's like building in extra margins of safety, because when you're dealing with supersonic speeds, there's no room for error.
Exactly. And another lesson is the need for rigorous testing and analysis. Pushing the limits of flight requires meticulous attention to detail and a deep understanding of the aerodynamic forces at play. It's about minimizing risk through careful design, engineering, and testing.
And I imagine that sharing information, learning from each other's successes and failures is crucial as well, right?
Absolutely. Supersonic flight is a global endeavor, and international collaboration is key to making it safer for everyone. Sharing data, best practices, and lessons learned can help prevent future accidents and advance the technology more responsibly.
So as we look to the future of supersonic flight, with companies like Boom Supersonic pushing the boundaries once again, are we doomed to repeat these mistakes? Or have we learned enough to make supersonic travel safer and more sustainable?
I believe we've learned a great deal from those past accidents, and that knowledge is being incorporated into the design and operation of new supersonic aircraft, like the X-59. The focus on quieter sonic booms, more efficient engines, and sustainable fuels. It all points to a more responsible approach to supersonic flight.
So it's not just about going fast. It's about going fast safely, sustainably, and responsibly. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible while being mindful of the risks and the lessons learned from those who came before.
Exactly.
It's been an incredible journey, exploring the world of supersonic flight with you. We've covered the history, the engineering marvels, the challenges, and even the tragedies that have shaped this pursuit of speed. And while the future of supersonic flight is still being written, it's clear that the dream of breaking the sound barrier and making it a regular part of travel is still very much alive.
I agree, and it's a future worth striving for. A future where we can connect our world in faster and more efficient ways, while also being mindful of our impact on the planet and the lessons learned from those who dared to push the limits before us.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and sometimes turbulent world of supersonic flight.